talk about Lincoln for a minute, because the typical view is, well, Lincoln was trying to fight slavery and it was just against the South, and that was it. But that's not necessarily. You bring up other historical elements of how the Catholic Church was absolutely involved in supporting the South against the North, with the desire to break up or to cause weakness in the Union, and really to break it up, right? I mean,
right. Yeah, it's not that the Confederacy was a Catholic movement. I wouldn't say that, but there were many Catholics that were involved, and politically, the Vatican supported the Southern Confederacy. So the Pope was the only world leader that wrote a letter of acknowledgement of Jefferson Davis as the president of the new,
separate country.
Exactly, basically a separate country. And that was a big deal, a very, very big deal. But it was known that the Vatican was supporting the Confederacy. You had people like Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis had been educated by Dominican priests. He had advisors who were Catholic priests. The first chaplain of the Confederacy was a Jesuit. He had people like John Bannon, a Confederate priest, and then the Archbishop of New York, who
kind of a double agent, it seems like.
Yeah, he was a double agent. They called him Dagger John Hughes, Archbishop Hughes. And he was called Dagger John because he was a very tough guy. But he seemed to outwardly support Lincoln because he was based in New York. Yeah, he's in the North. But it was said by Chineke and others that he secretly was supporting the Confederacy politically. And it's the politics that, that matter. That's where the Vatican was supporting the Confederacy, because they were hoping to break up the Union entirely and establish what they called a Roman Catholic Empire from Mexico through America all the way up into Canada. That was the plan, according to Chineke and then a Union general named General Thomas Maley Harris. He sat on the committee to investigate the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and came to the conclusion that the Vatican and the Jesuits were the ones who had trained John Wilkes Booth and the other conspirators to kill Lincoln. And he wrote a book years later called Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, all of this is documented. It's been brushed under the carpet for some reason. Obviously, there are certain people who don't want us to know about this. But the evidence was so overwhelming that the United States government, after the Civil War, broke off diplomatic relations with the Vatican for more than 100 years.
So, I mean, just say that again. I mean, say that again. Really, people, that this isn't conspiracy. Oh, wow, the government, the United States government.
Yeah, the United States government, because the evidence that came out in court, and General Harris talks about this, because he sat there, he watched the witnesses come in, he saw all the evidence firsthand, and he's documenting it in his book. And he said there's just no question that this was a Vatican plot involving the Jesuits who were at Georgetown College, which became Georgetown University, which is their headquarters here in the United States, that this was a Romish plot to kill Lincoln, mainly because they were angry that Lincoln, one, because he opposed the Confederacy, but also because he refused to acknowledge this European emperor that they had set up down in Mexico. And this is a whole chapter of the Civil War most people don't know about, where there was what was called the European plot. There was the Monroe Doctrine. President James Monroe said to the European countries, don't try to colonize North America. Just stay out of North America. Because we had had all these conflicts with the French, with the British, with Spain. You see what I'm saying? Over and over again. So they said, okay, we're a separate country now. This is the United States. Don't try to colonize here. Well, you had a plot involving Pope Pius IX, the Emperor Napoleon III of France, and then Maximilian I of Austria. So these three Catholic powers worked together to invade Mexico with a French army.
1862?
1862. And they invaded Mexico. And the idea was they were going to take control of Mexico and then go up and invade the southern United States and help the Confederacy defeat Lincoln. not because they were pro-Confederacy, but because they wanted to break up the Union. And so this is why Lincoln was fighting so hard to preserve the Union. They talk about that today, that he preserved the Union, but the full historic context is not given. That there were these powers in Europe that wanted to establish this, and I'm quoting General Harris now, literally, he says they wanted to establish a Roman Catholic Empire from Mexico through Texas, California, all the way up to Canada.
Basically the West.
Exactly. And so what Chineke says, and we talked about this earlier, what Chineke says...
Who's Chineke for people that don't know?
Charles Chineke was a Canadian Catholic priest who was the good friend of Abraham Lincoln. He had actually migrated into America with a congregation from Canada. He was the founder of St. Anne, Illinois. And he was actually a nationally recognized figure. He was well known. When he died, his obituary appeared on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah, amazing. So this guy of stature, for sure.
He
was Catholic.
He was Catholic. He did convert and become Protestant later on. But he was the good friend of Abraham Lincoln. He had gotten into a conflict with the church leaders in the Catholic Church, and they dragged him into court through an agent of theirs named Peter Spink, and were accusing Chineke of different things. Well, long story short, Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer at that time, and he defended Chineke in court and won the case and had the charges thrown out and basically rescued Chineke from almost certain ruin. And so that's how they met each other and how they became friends. But this is years before Lincoln became president. So Chineke was a famous priest because in Canada, he had opposed alcoholism and stuff like that. And so everybody thought he was this very virtuous man. He was well-liked, well-loved by his congregation. But he encountered the corruption from Rome and believed that the hierarchy was angry at Lincoln for defending him. And he even warned Lincoln, because he said he saw Jesuits in the courtroom when the trial happened, and when the hierarchy was defeated, he said he saw a look on the face of the Jesuits that they were eventually going to kill Lincoln. That's what he believed. But of course it didn't happen until years later when the Civil War happens. And so Chineke wrote 2 books. He wrote a book called 50 Years in the Church of Rome, where he describes his own journey, as a Catholic priest and all the experiences that he had, and then his relationship with Abraham Lincoln, and how he became the friend of Lincoln. But he met him repeatedly in the White House and warned him because he believed that the Jesuits were planning and plotting to kill him. Now, some people would think and have tried to argue that Chineke's claims were exaggerated, or maybe he, shouldn't be trusted, this kind of thing. Later historians after World War II made those kind of claims. The problem is, when you get to General Harris's book, who was a Union general, he was a doctor, he sat on the court, he actually confirmed most everything that Chineke had to say. And so their views of things, work together, and one confirms the witness of the other. But then when you have the book in the 20th century by Emmett McLaughlin, which was called An Inquiry into the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, McLaughlin was a Catholic priest, and he kept hearing these stories. This is happening in the 1960s. And McLaughlin kept hearing these stories about the assassination of Lincoln. And he said, could there be anything to this? So he started investigating, started going through the church records and so on. And he said he was just amazed at how much information he uncovered.